Hey everyone, welcome. We're just starting this up a few minutes early, so you don't have to be sitting there staring at a blank screen, waiting to come in. So come on in, join us. No one is watching us yet, I don't think. And we will get started in just a minute. Put a beautiful cocktail in front of you, so you can check that out. Oh yeah, really gooey. That is what we're going to be making today. Welcome. As you all are coming in, let us know where you're tuning in from. Who are you? Drop in the chat what your name is and where you're located so that we can say hi and know who we're talking to. And we will get started in just a few minutes, chatting about the old-fashioned. Don't want to give too much away until we're ready. Stephen here's enjoying some coffee.
I pretty much walk around with a cup of coffee in my hands always.
We had our two cups each already.
Yeah.
I might want like a Mr. Black variation.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You tell me.
It can happen. If you want a third cup of coffee today.
I do.
He'll probably be up late editing anyway.
Yeah.
I will be too.
That'll make me happy.
These two peas in a pod. So say hi. Drop a hello in the chat.
Hello, friends.
Hi, how are you? Do you pronounce your name Bergen or Bergen?
1 for the first one, 2 for the second.
I'm gonna know if it's okay.
Thanks. Put a 1 in the chat if it's Bergen.
Put a 2 in the chat if it's
Bergen.
Virgin.
Or put a 3 in the chat if it's something totally different. I don't know who Candace what is that? Candace Bergen?
Oh.
I don't know who Candace is.
1.
Number
Okay,
1,
yeah.
Bergen. Yes.
Cheers.
All right.
Welcome.
Thanks for joining us. So you said it's evening. How late in the evening, and where are you coming in from? And I wonder who else is on. If you're, I don't know. We are still here a few minutes early, so we just wanted to test everything out. How do we sound?
How do we look?
How do we look? This is our first time using the setup for the live stream, so we want to just make sure that we worked out all the bugs before we actually got started, and give you all something to look forward to.
Cheers,
Texas.
mates. Welcome.
Great. So you're done with work for the day for sure. Here in California, we're scheduled at a 4:30. Oh, good to hear. Thank you. And we like to think about that as incentive to close out your day early and get to the funner parts of the evening.
Yeah, we need a step stool for... He's not short. It's the way that the camera
16
angle.
millimeters.
Yeah, it's a camera thing. It's a camera trick.
How far away is he anyway?
There you go. You'll look bigger now.
Alright, thanks.
Kind of.
I'm just gonna stand really close.
There.
I'm actually
see?
the biggest one.
There he is. I'm gonna stand right in like the corner, so like my forehead looks long.
Long foreheads are gonna be in this year.
Oh yeah, it's 2020, 2021.
Bergen, do you have a cocktail already at the ready? Or are you planning on making one along with us during this live stream? And who else is here in the room? Just say hey and let us know what you are going to be making tonight. Or if you already have something that you're sipping, give us a shout.
You know what I found myself doing?
What?
Like, it's like subconscious, but when I have nothing to do, if I'm talking to someone, I'm just listening or waiting, I start doing this.
Let's just do this, huh?
It's the baby sway. It's so the baby sway.
Does it like put you at ease?
Hey, John. Welcome.
What's up, John? Hello, James.
Oh, James is making a pre-made old-fashioned
very nice.
from the PDF that we sent out. Yes.
There you go.
Wonderful.
Prefabbed. Did you guys send it like an erector set kind of thing, or?
That would be nice. Mail
know,
delivery, pre-batched old fashions. It is a thing now.
That is the new wave, man. having pre-batched cocktails at the ready in your freezer. It's
Especially the
great.
mixer portion, right?
Oh man, it's a great idea. Like I have a friend who like just powers through martinis, and her boyfriend made her like a full like liter bottle of like pre-batched, pre-diluted martini, and she went through it in like a night and a half. And she's like, never ever do that again. He thought he was doing a good thing for her, and she's like,
Here,
that's
baby,
it.
here's a sippy cup.
Right. Well, she was like trying to do the whole 30 thing, and then like martini readily available 50-50 martini in the freezer at the ready. I don't think I could. Yeah.
We'll be chatting about the martini next week. That'll be really fun. One of
a
my
really
favorite
awesome
cocktails.
Special guest too. Yeah, that's coming down from LA for that.
Yep. Okay, well, thank you to those of you that are joining us. It is officially 4:30. I'm assuming that we'll have additional folks hopping on the call, but we've got at least Bergen, John, and James have said hello. So if you are also around, just let us know in the chat who you are and where you're coming from. What city are you in? What time is it where you are? And if you've already made a cocktail, what are you drinking? Or if you're ready to make an old-fashioned with us, then get your stuff together. Throw your mixing glass in the freezer if it's not pre-chilled. That was a tip that we learned from Stephen in December when we talked to him about the old-fashioned.
I'm back.
And then just a quick note, you all may not be seeing all the comments because we're live streaming to both Facebook and YouTube. So we're testing out 2 different platforms. If you guys got a preference for one or the other, I see you're tuning in from both. But know that there are others on the other that are part of this conversation too. And one of the reasons we're doing a bit of a preview of the live stream is because we're testing out some of the best ways to engage. And so this will be a bit of an iterative process. I think that the experience will get better and better, especially next week for our official first launch. So thank you for joining us, helping us improve the experience. And I welcome your feedback. You can certainly respond directly to me, RachelEva@StandardSpoon.com, with any of that feedback. Hey, now, Stephen, are you Stephen? I'm assuming most people pronounce their name Stephen.
I'm the weird one.
Our guest writes his name the same as you, but pronounces it Stefan.
Yeah.
So if you've been pronouncing it in your head the way that Stephen Henkenmeyer pronounces his name, I'm assuming that it's the more traditional way.
That's a good assumption.
I'd love to introduce you to Stefan and to myself and to Sean.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hi.
Welcome to our bar. Welcome to our home. This is where Sean and I have made our lives in San Diego. And if you are at all familiar with our story, we started making barware about 7 years ago. We've known Stefan for quite a few years. We're here in San Diego. And Stefan is a veteran bartender. I think that you're self-described in that way.
Well, 20 years kind of, I think, if you do anything for 20 years, you can pretty much say you're a veteran.
And he started when he was 5 years old, which is technically illegal.
Right. Right. I'm also from the Bay Area, Stephen. And my father's name is actually Stephen. We just decided to pronounce mine differently for some reason. But coming from San Francisco, the old-fashioned and like just old school, like traditional cocktails were, that's what I cut my teeth on and moved down to San Diego, and obviously really got into more like refreshing cocktails down the road. But nothing, to me, like just is synonymous for like deliciousness and like going to a really awesome bar and having a great time than an old fashioned. So I'm really excited to be here to talk more about this cocktail with you all. And, thanks for joining us today, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Should we? And then we have a few people that are joining the chat. Somebody from Wisconsin, James. That's rad. Huge following for the old fashioned. It's a different variant, but it's absolutely a huge cocktail in Wisconsin. In Ohio, I see that as well.
Hi, Diane. Thanks for joining us.
Diane's preloaded and ready to go with the old fashioned. Yeah.
So before Stefan gets started and talks a little bit about the old fashioned, I wanted to just invite the rest of you, if you haven't already, let us know who you are and where you're tuning in from. We love to know where our audience is. We typically get somebody from, like, everyone's from a different state, which I love, because then we can talk about regional differences in cocktails and that sort of thing too. So drop it in the chat. We're streaming from both to YouTube and Facebook. So if you don't see all the parallel comments, don't worry. We're working on a more cohesive commenting experience in the future. But I just wanted to let you know, just a little bit of housekeeping there. And then especially as Stephen is talking about a little bit about the old-fashioned in his introduction, please don't be shy. Start putting anything in the chat that you're interested in, that you want to ask a question about, or that you want to tap into his deep expertise about, because then I will be building out sort of our Q&A portion, which will be the majority of the second half of this. And then we'll love to get into the nitty-gritty about what is so applicable and real for you so that you can take something away from this immediately and work on improving your stirred cocktails at home. So put that in the chat. I will be checking with you guys here and there. And for now, let's just have Stephen introduce kind of the old-fashioned. He's going to talk about history, the cocktail family, and then like basic specs to get started.
Oh man, the old-fashioned, such a great cocktail, right? It started life as the whiskey cocktail, and that being a true cocktail, really the first true cocktail. So it begun the whole cocktail family that is known as cocktails. Before that, you had more like duos, such as two ingredients together, or the most ordered cocktail per se. The most ordered and most popular drink before that was the julep, really. Which is, the precursor to a modern cocktail. Basically, it had everything you needed except for one very crucial ingredient that kind of binded and created a more interesting, more balanced cocktail. So the whiskey cocktail, as it started out in the early 1800s, really started that genre of cocktails, and it's the first to have 4 really specific ingredients. A spirit, generally brown spirit is what we're talking about now. Some sort of sugar content, some sort of sugar element, I presume. Bitters, which is the one that really sets it off from anything else, and then water, usually through dilution, through ice. So it started life as the whiskey cocktail, and then just like anything, right? Bartenders got way more adventurous and started playing around with the build, and by the end of the 1800s, you would see people would actually start ordering the whiskey cocktail in an old-fashioned style, because at that point you'd already had so many variations on the whiskey cocktail, such as the Manhattan and Sazerac, all these other things, improved whiskey cocktails, so that when you would walk into a bar and want this very specific drink, you would actually ask for it old-fashioned style, which is where the name came from, and it's absolutely stuck. And since the late 1800s, this drink has seen a huge, progression, I would per se. And what you see today is something very similar to what it originated from. But in the years after Prohibition, you would see a totally different drink. I know there's somebody on this call or somebody on this feed from Wisconsin, and they kind of hearken to that like 1940s, 50s style old-fashioned with some muddled fruit. A definitely different, more vibrant, more fruity, obviously more sweet component. And then right around the early 2000s in San Francisco, New York, and Chicago, when you see people like Jim Meehan and Sasha Petrowski kind of rediscover the classics, the old-fashioned became a bit more like a classic version of it, really going back to basics. And that was what we saw in the early 2000s, was taking a very literal approach to historical cocktails. Whereas even now, I think, now that we have relearned some of the history behind these cocktails, we're applying more modern advances, modern elements to our cocktails to make them even better, right? I think we get lost in like the love and the romance of old, like classic, historic ideas and drinks and what have you. But sometimes those aren't always the best, right? Just because it was the old way of doing things doesn't mean that it's the best way. A lot of the times they didn't have the modern advances we have now. And when we get into other cocktails, like early cocktails that had citrus or pineapple ingredients, totally different wacky builds because it had never been done before. And something like pineapple, which was super exotic, if you put it in any cocktail, people would just explode and be like, wow, look, it's pineapple. I've never had it before. But yeah, the old-fashioned's kind of gone through that variation too. And what I love about it is that it's so simple and elegant, yet it's subtle and complex, and that bitterness element really adds to the whole experience. And it really opened the door to mixologists and bartenders to kind of go down a more balanced palate, where it's not just a sweet cocktail, it's more complex and interesting. And there's hardly anything better. I have a buddy. He owns a couple bars in San Francisco. And the look of this drink is always the best seller on his menus. Trick Dog and a lot of those menus. It doesn't matter if it looks like an old fashioned. It's the most ordered drink because it's iconic. It's classic. It's the one that you want to sip on, right? It's a daiquiri. You're gonna pound it. It's delicious, and then you have to spend another $14 at a bar to order another. Whereas the old fashioned, you get to sit and ponder, and you can, I've sat at a bar for hours and wrote poetry while sipping on an old fashioned. It's one of those drinks, right? Or one that you can have a couple of and really chat with your friends and have a good time. We have one fly in this entire set, and it found the cocktail.
James. His name is James.
His name is James.
It's from that kiwi.
Oh man, we have one kiwi in here.
James!
We found it. Yeah, right.
That one kiwi.
So that's kind of the history and the origin of the cocktail. It's obviously spurred a huge amount of classic variations on that theme. I've already mentioned the Manhattan and all of its variations, right? The Rob Roy, the Green Point, all those style cocktails. You also have things like the Bijou, which is a gin, like improved version of an old fashioned, right? Something that has other elements other than just a sweetener. And then even more modern classics that harken back to the original cocktail, such as the Walkin' Old Fashioned, right? Which is an agave spirits version of the old fashioned cocktail. Those all get their start right here. And we've obviously been able to use other ways to sweeten this drink, whether it be green chartreuse or other modifiers and vermouths or any of those types of things to take in place of just a sweetener such as syrup. We've changed bitters, we've swapped bitters out, or we've used Campari or other bitter aperitifs in the play of that bitter. So you don't have to be so literal with those 4 ingredients to have it be a cocktail, a true cocktail, and have it kind of play off that original old-fashioned vibe. But it's something that you should keep in mind, and it's something that always comes back to this one very specific cocktail. So what should we...
We had one question about the variation in the Midwest that has muddled fruit.
Yeah.
Muddled fruit and lots of it. And I think we talked about this when we were doing our initial film version, is that there's just so many different variations and plays on it. Did you want to chat a little bit about that?
I'd love to. In the 20 years I've bartended, I've seen the whole circle of this cocktail. And I think in the last chat we had about this cocktail, I mentioned that this was always the Boomerang Drink for me when I first got my start behind the bar, is that somebody would order an old fashioned and half of them would come from the Midwest and they would expect a certain thing. And some of them would come from, other areas around San Francisco, expecting what they would have at Bourbon and Branch or what have you, something that looked like this. And then there was all these variations in between. There was like kind of a press style with soda from a gun, which was expected a few times and requested a few times. So there was always a few different ways to make this drink. And one of them, a very classic Midwestern, I guess, but also just mid-century was really where it originated, was that idea of muddling fruit into the cocktail. And that really came from trying to recreate some of these old-fashioned variations, such as the Manhattan and stuff like that, when you didn't have, readily available ingredients. One of the things that happened during Prohibition was, before Prohibition, we had this explosion of mixology and bartending, and it was a really beautiful time to be, inspired by drinking and drinking culture and history. But right as Prohibition hit, access to vermouths, aperitif, bitter ingredients in general kind of went away. A lot of these liqueurs from Europe were very hard to get. Heck, spirits in general became a little difficult to procure as well. Drinking was difficult. So in a more public setting, kind of like it is right now. So for the first few years of Prohibition, it was just hard to get this stuff. So you'd have to start improvising. And one of the ways to kind of recreate sweet vermouth, in a cocktail was to muddle some maraschino sherries into the cocktail. So that's kind of where that started. And then further we get through Prohibition, the further we get from people enjoying bitter ingredients in cocktails and in food, really, it was hard. People's palates changed not just from Prohibition, but through World War II. a lot with just scarcity of food and certain foods. Our palates just completely changed here in the U.S. to really back off of more bitter things and get more into like sweeter, mass-produced things. So the old fashioned went through a huge shift in what people were drinking around that time. In the Midwest, they still kind of they stay on that traditional mid-century old fashioned, which is just cool. I mean, it's rad to have regional cocktails and regional styles of drinks, just like we do food. America was the birthplace of the cocktail, and I think it's rad to be able to think of it in that terms, right? I mean, New Orleans has a very specific style of cocktails, whereas New York has a totally different perspective. And here on the West Coast, we have a totally different idea of what how we like to balance our cocktails and how they should look. And now if you look at Europe and other areas, like cocktails look different no matter where you go. So it's cool. It's cool that there's, one specific thing for Wisconsin. I think that's a rad thing, yeah.
And I think that one of the things that we like and that we're interested in exploring on the cocktail journey is how do we acknowledge and celebrate all these different variations and different approaches to cocktails. I think one of the things that we're not interested in doing, and we'll talk about this a lot next week with our martini session, is there's not necessarily, we're not interested in planting our flag and saying this is the one authoritative way to make this cocktail, and if you make it any other way, you're wrong. Because that's just not practical, and it's not fun.
No.
And it
doesn't inspire a community to want to grow together and be inspired to learn new things and be creative and enjoy things together, right? When we're all pointing at each other going, that's the wrong way, that's the wrong
that's
way.
Right. However, and I'm just going to interrupt us for a second, because I think that there might be some of you that have your ingredients at the ready, and you probably would love to enjoy something like this that's sitting in front of you. So if you haven't already started making your own old fashioned,
we should go ahead and give you the permission to make a old fashioned.
Let's get started.
Should we do it together?
Yeah, let's do it together. So Stefan's going to walk us through his favorite old fashioned recipe. And
it's delicious.
And then we'd love to hear, as he's making it and chatting with you about the cocktail, think about, how do I make things differently? And is there a way that I prefer my old fashioned? Or if you've got any questions about the ingredients he's using and that sort of thing, drop them in the chat. We'd love to chat about it as well. Oh, great. Okay. Just a sec, Murph.
I like how the music cut out right when...
We had some background music playing. Did you guys hear that? Did you like it? Did you not like it? All right, so a couple of things if you feel like chatting about some of the stuff while you're making the cocktail. You couldn't even hear the music. Okay, well, it was just for us then.
I was digging it.
Sean's a big audiophile, so I think that if we hadn't started making barware, we might have started making music together.
See, Jamie liked the music in the last chat.
He did.
Oh, good.
The Q&A one?
All right, I'm going to stop stirring so we can go over the specs real quick, just in case. So I started with 3 dashes of Angostura bitters. Any aromatic bitters will do, but don't feel emboldened to that one thing. If you like really bright citrus flavors, I would recommend Angostura or Regan's orange bitters goes really well in here. You can even do a little bit of both. And then I use a bar spoon of a rich simple syrup, which is 2 parts sugar to 1 part water by weight. But you can use simple syrup. If you do use simple syrup, I would just add 2 bar spoons, just to adjust the recipe a little bit. And then 2 ounces of the whiskey of your choosing. I used a beautiful 100 proof rye from Old Forester. This stuff is actually really delicious for the price. But also, don't feel like you have to use a rye. I love using rye in old fashions because an old fashioned drink is a very spirit forward cocktail. but it does have some dilution. I love the rye spice. It really does poke out a little bit in the final cocktail. It adds that nice little depth. But you could also use something like Rittenhouse rye if you want to stick with the rye. I do like the 100 proof bottled bond. That's generally like a really good sweet spot for a mixing, like a stirred cocktail. But feel free if you like more vanilla kind of woody notes to use a bourbon. It's going to be a little bit sweeter finished cocktail, but super delicious. And then you can get fun with using all kinds of whiskeys all over the world as well. You can use anything from Scotch, even a smokier Scotch if you love like kind of more smoky Scotch. Irish whiskey works great. Even like other New World whiskeys, there's some really great single malts out of the West Coast. Actually, there's a few here in California, and there's a couple in Oregon and Washington. There's also this really rad product out of Australia, which is a single malt. This one actually is a dual malt. There's actually some wheat in this, which is kind of nice if you like wheated bourbons. This one's kind of a fun one to play with as well. Kind of lends a little bit of fruitiness to a old fashioned. This is properly diluted now though, so we'll go ahead and strain this right into a chilled cocktail glass.
And we talked quite a bit when we met in December about dilution, which we ended up having quite a few questions for people popping onto our Q&A
really
a couple of weeks ago, our Q&A live stream. So I think that it would probably be worth it to just chat a little bit about what properly diluted means and how you know something is properly diluted. And then if there's other things you want Stephen to go over, feel free to drop that in the chat and we're going to get to Q&A.
Cool. So let's talk dilution because this cocktail doesn't have a whole lot of ingredients wise, right? There's only a few ingredients in an old fashioned. So other than those basic specs, that basic recipe I just mentioned, and that's just a rule of thumb. Obviously, if you like sweeter cocktails, you can add a little extra sweetener, or you can back off of it if you like a drier cocktail. But really where the finesse of this cocktail is going to lie, besides a really good whiskey, is really in the dilution. So to think about dilution, and just to think about stirring in general, there's a couple different things that occur when you stir a cocktail or shake a cocktail, right? You're obviously blending the ingredients together so that they're really deliciously balanced together, but you're also chilling the cocktail and you're diluting the cocktail. Now, those two things work in kind of, they work together, but they're also, they work at different ratios. So chilling a cocktail and diluting a cocktail, they happen in different levels, I guess. And if you're shaking a cocktail, you can do that really easily. You can do it quickly because you're adding a ton of agitation. Stirring a cocktail, rather, is a little bit more archaic. It doesn't work as well. Obviously, you can't get a drink as cold stirring as you can shaking because there's really very little agitation at all. There's also, you're not breaking up the ice. You're not adding extra surface area for the ice to really dilute the drink quickly. So I do recommend starting off with a chilled glass. I think that's super important because it'll help chill the cocktail immediately. So you actually want to get the cocktail as cold as possible, as fast as possible, so that you can then slow down that dilution ratio to a level where you can really stir for a while without losing in over diluting the drink. So when you know it's ready, that's kind of, bartenders will always call that like a feel thing, and it can be to a certain degree. But if you think of old fashions being a very unique cocktail in the way that it will be served on ice, I would always err on the side of under diluting an old fashioned than over diluting. Whereas when we get next week with the martini, we're going to take a totally different approach to stirring a martini as we would to the old fashioned. And when you're bartending, when you watch bartenders bartend, it looks like they're just making every drink the same way, right? They're shaking a cocktail the same way, independent of what kind of cocktail it is. They're stirring a cocktail the same way, independent of what kind of cocktail it is. And it's not always true. It looks like that because they're good at their jobs and they're kind of, they've been doing it a while, but they take different approaches. So the old fashioned, you want to slightly under dilute because you will be pouring it over, this is best case scenario, right? This beautiful hand cut ice from Penny Pound in LA. We don't all have access to this, but you want to try to get as large of ice cubes as possible. So if your freezer makes really tiny little kind of chippy ice, I recommend maybe not using that if you have other options available. And one option is just to buy a tray with 1 to 1.5 inch cubes that you can freeze yourself. then I recommend trying to keep those away from any foodstuffs that can, add, off odors. And use that to stir and then to pour over. I would highly recommend pouring over fresh ice, not the same ice that you use to stir with. That's also really important because the ice that you've stirred with, you've already warmed up and it's already kind of broken down kind of the, its bonds, right? The really cold ice. And to pour over some fresh ice that's really cold so that it'll hold the dilution level that you poured in there as long as possible. The old fashioned isn't a drink that's going to taste the same at the last sip as the first sip because it's sitting on ice. So yeah, when you're talking about dilution, I would err on the side of under diluting because you can always sit there and let it, melt into the drink, melt into the glass a little bit. Whereas like a martini or something like that, whatever you pour into that martini glass is that's as dilute as it's gonna get. So that's also important to think of.
Can you talk a little bit about the ounce mark? So what's the target mark for a drink that's been diluted properly, and then you can start with 3 ounces. Then
right,
what's the amount you're gonna.
Yeah, so we're starting here with a little over 2 ounces, right? So it's 2 ounces worth of whiskey and a bar spoon, which is 1/8 of an ounce generally. So you're getting under 2 1/4 ounces of just the cocktail.
And what's the target for?
The target, you want about 20-25% dilution. So you're looking at about 3 ounces or so. Now, once again, I'd never tell people how to make cocktails in their own house. So if you want to use 3 ounces of whiskey, you should absolutely use 3 ounces of whiskey.
If you only have refrigerator ice, don't let that stop you from making a cocktail right now.
James.
Yeah, no, exactly, and that's the fun about it, right? Is that everybody has a different palate, everybody has a different, favorite way to make an old fashioned. But I guarantee you that most of us on the stream have had a cocktail very similar to the one that I just stirred, and probably very similar to the one that you've had at home, and it takes you back to that first place you had it. And for me, the first place I had one of these just gorgeous old fashions with pristine ice, just perfectly stirred, was actually in Edinburgh. We spent a day out in Edinburgh, Scotland, before we went up to Speyside on a whiskey trip. And there's this really awesome, very Scottish, redheaded dude that owns a ice house there, Edinburgh Ice Ice Company, I think is what it's called. Dude's a crazy nut. He uses one of those, I can't remember what they call those things, a claima or whatever they are, the big sword, Scottish swords, that curve, and he uses that to cut his ice.
Oh, brother!
But he cut this crazy large ice cube in this beautiful glass, and he served me this perfectly balanced old fashioned. And for me, even though I've had this drink all over the world, that's where I go for sure. And it did have Scotch whiskey, which I prefer rye in mine, but it was spectacular. That's where it takes me. I don't know where it takes you all. But yeah, for sure. This is a pretty sexy drink. I'm going to drink the one we were sitting on over here.
Sean, you can let that sit there and start sweating, or you can start enjoying it.
I also really enjoy, we haven't gotten there yet, but I also enjoy when you do have these beautiful ice cubes, watching where you've stopped, you can see play-by-play of where you've enjoyed your cocktail.
Oh yeah, all the ridges around it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's a timestamp. Mm-hmm. This is when we were fighting.
Yeah.
This is when we were.
There you go. Yeah, that's where I made
the rings in the tree.
There's a lot of people talking about which whiskey they're using, which is really rad.
I asked everyone. I said, which whiskeys are we using? No. Mostly the folks on YouTube are talking about their whiskey, although Richard on Facebook just said Basil Hayden, Dark Rye.
Oh, man.
We got a lot of Wild Turkey whiskey. 101 fans.
So the 101 Rye is from Wild Turkey is absolutely one of my favorites. And it went away for a few years, and it was actually cocktail bartenders, most of them based in San Diego, starting with Eric Castro, that was able to petition Campari, the parent company of Wild Turkey, to bring that particular bottle back. So if you
We were so sad when it went away.
If you have Wild Turkey, and it came from Facebook. They started a Facebook group, and they were this was one of the first ones actually when Facebook groups started becoming a thing. where it actually made a change. And nowadays, like Facebook groups will, you know, like you can do everything from like storming the Capitol to buying ridiculous like 1990s mall stock and like watching companies come back from the dead. And, you know, there's all kinds of things to do on Facebook groups now. But you can thank Eric Castro in a really like early bartenders Facebook group for that, having that bottle to enjoy in your bar, which is rad.
Yep, that's great. We have some Piggyback in there, Bullet 95 rye.
That Piggyback, though, is really spectacular. I had that for the first time a couple months ago from the Whistle Pig rep, and I was just blown away. So great old-fashioned.
Mm-hmm. And it's worth mentioning, too, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the fact that we're launching a regular series like this beginning next week. This is a preview of that. And that's part of a new project that we're working on called The Cocktail Journey. And one of the things that we are very rapidly working on tying up with a pretty bow right now is a set of recommendations for 15 bottles for your bar that you can use this year to make 52 cocktails, one for every week of the year, beginning with the martini next week. And we worked with Stephen to come up with bottle recommendations at a couple different pricing points for each of those. And Wild Turkey 101 and Piggyback are definitely on that list as recommended bottles.
So is that Michter's, by the way. That Michter's straight rye, Stephen, is banging.
Very good.
So good.
So that'll be coming out next week for everyone who's joined us already and has a membership to the Cocktail Journey. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll drop a link in the chat. But you can also just go to launch.thecocktailjourney.com and check it out. But I will also drop that in.
You can really see a really silky, smooth, awesome video that these two created for that launch.
It is going to just be so much fun.
Yeah.
I think that these weekly events to connect about cocktails is going to be just the core kind of community building and cocktail exploration tool. But then we will be working on adding a lot of on-demand video content. We're going to do like a 5-part series on ice and dig into cocktail families, cocktail theory.
Can't wait to teach the ice cutting class.
Oh, it's going to be fun.
That I've just visualized that I've decided we're doing.
Yeah,
I didn't know if we were or not, but we're
doing it.
Yeah.
Actually, Carl asked us, does the clear ice cube, I get the concept, really make a difference? Maybe I just drink mine too quickly, which I think we've all
if you drink it quickly, it won't matter what you do. You can probably just pour it straight from the Yari from right into your mouth. But
can I go?
Yeah,
I want to go.
Yeah, you should.
The fact that the cube is clear, it's just denser. There's less air in there. There's less impurities. There's if you're using really great water, there's less mineral taste. So as it dilutes, it doesn't have any air in it. It's just super cold in the middle of this super clear cube. So if your ice doesn't look super clear and it has no flavor, it's fine. Mm-hmm. But if it's white because it's got tons of air in it, and you go to stir your drink with it, it's gonna be a very different experience, especially if it has other flavors in there.
Right. I mean, if you're buying a block of ice at your grocery store and it's completely white and you're tearing that down, it's a nice big cube. It's got great surface area. You're probably going to be just fine. A lot of this is obviously aesthetic driven. And when you go to a cocktail bar and you pay $18 in San Francisco or New York for a drink, it better be clear ice. Otherwise, what the heck did I just?
What are you paying for?
Yeah, exactly. It does make minor differences, right? You will notice a change, especially if you let it sit long enough. If you're drinking it within the first couple minutes, you're probably not going to mind so much. But like I said, I would recommend trying to use as large of an ice cube as possible, or ice cubes as possible, in your glass for your final cocktail. Stirring, on the other hand, if you just have like shake or ice, that could probably work. You can just stir it a little less. But yeah, for the final cocktail, you want to try to keep it as large cubes as possible. And I mean, you could probably go to a local store and find larger cubes that coming from a decent ice machine. Or like I said, you can absolutely freeze them using silicone molds in your freezer.
And if you're going to drink it like pretty quickly, the importance of having that large cube is a little bit less important because it's not going to sit in that glass and dilute really, really fast.
And if you drink it fast, you can probably use one of those large cubes for multiple cocktails.
Mm-hmm. So we have a couple questions about sugar.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
One from Chris about simple syrup, and I think you may have mentioned it earlier in terms of when you're making simple syrup, is it a 1-to-1 ratio by volume or by weight, which is what Arnold recommends?
Yes. Yeah, so I always talk about weight. If you can grab a gram scale, I highly recommend it. You should have it in your kitchen anyways, both for cooking, for making coffee or tea, and then absolutely for if you're really getting into cocktails at home. It's a more scientific and more accurate representation of amounts, because sugar is not in its crystal form is a solid. It's not a liquid. Trying to approximate this equal parts or 2-to-1 ratio of a solid and in water, right? A liquid. You're not going to really approximate that well. Your best way to really, scientifically measure that is going to be by weight, which is a more accurate idea of, its density and, molecular structure. So yeah, if you can, I highly recommend a gram scale. If you can't, you absolutely can eyeball it. You're going to get something plenty close enough. And yeah, basically, once we start getting the 15-bottle bar kind of up and running, you'll kind of see that it's great to have both of those syrups in your home bar at the ready, because both of them will last for weeks, if not months, if you keep it in your fridge. And they're both super simple to do. And the other thing, when you're talking about sugar, that's really to taste. I don't recommend using like powdered sugar. That doesn't really work very well, and it's really messy. There are some old school drinks that call for castor or powdered sugar, and that's one of those moments where I mentioned earlier where sometimes the historical recipe isn't always the best just because it's historic.
That hits on a question that Jamie just asked, which is, every recipe for the old-fashioned I found in my cocktail books calls for sugar rather than simple syrup, and often stirred in the same glass it's served in.
Sure. And
thoughts?
I'm not going to tell you that you can't make a delicious old-fashioned both using like a sugar cube or actually stirring it directly into a glass. I do that at home all the time, especially with my Negronis. So you can do that for sure. And I've actually worked at cocktail bars where we used sugar cubes, actually raw sugar cubes. And we'd add just a touch of water to help dilute that with some bitters, and we'd actually muddle it like the old-fashioned way, and then add a couple ounces of whiskey to that and stir that in the glass. So that is absolutely a way to do it. It's just you're going to get a different end result, right? If you can't dilute all of that sugar cube in the time it takes for you to make this drink, so you're always going to have some granular sugar at the bottom of your cocktail, which isn't a bad thing. You might like that. Some people like to chew on ice. Some people like to chew on sugar. It can be like a textural thing.
But you could really strain it.
You could absolutely strain it too, but that seems like a lot of fuss for an old-fashioned, especially if there's a way to do it that's super delicious. But like I said, you can do it any way you want. But yeah, that's kind of what happens, and you get a different drink. You don't get something that's really smooth and like really well put together. It's more you get a little bit of granules. You get some whiskey. It's a different feel. It's a different drink. I think different outcome.
I had a conversation with somebody who was one of our barware customers for a long time, and it was, I think, last year, and I was asking him, and I love asking people about their cocktail journeys. How did they get on this path when they switched from just casually drinking cocktails to saying, oh my gosh, this is something that I'm into? And his was about having an old-fashioned in a bar in Aspen. I think I may have maybe mentioned this in our Q&A live stream if you were there. And he said he'd been making old-fashions at home for years for him and his partner and thought he was pretty good at it. And then he went to this bar in Aspen and he had this old-fashioned. And it just was like leagues better than what he was experiencing at home. And he had the opportunity to sit and talk with the bartender there about why is this so different. And it was a couple of key things that all together went into making a different kind of old-fashioned than he was used to. And it included accurate measurements, using simple syrup instead of sugar for that silkier, like smoother mouthfeel. It included ice and the way that you treat ice and dilution, and then the spirit selection that goes in. And so each one of these things could be, we could talk for a long time about. But that's one of the things we're so excited about this journey is, I especially miss going and sitting in front of the bar on a Monday night and listening to Stephen talk about how he's nerded out putting like this special mineral water in his bar on tap.
It's at my house now. I mean, just like anything, I'm sure that you all are experts in what you do for a living, right? And if somebody wanted to pick your brain on what you did and what you're really knowledgeable at, like, you could just go on and on about what that is and what you've learned over years of working on something and improving upon it. It's the same with bartenders, right? We've tinkered and tinkered and tinkered. When I was early in my career, I took the Manhattan. I spent months on the Manhattan. I made 12 different types of bitters, and I used 20 different types of whiskey and all the vermouths I could find to make what I decided for me and my palate was the best Manhattan I've ever made. And like, if somebody were to come up to my bar anytime after that, like 3-month process that I did, because bitters take a month to make. Like I could just wax on that forever, right? Just like, oh, you like the Manhattan? Cool, I do too. Let me tell you all these ways I've made it, all these variations I've done, right? So not having that, it's cool to be able to, for these two to put together a really rad program that kind of allows us all to continue that conversation outside of the bar. That's a really neat thing. And one thing, and I don't know, I may have seen something in that chat for a while, but when we're talking about ice, if you are going to make your own ice, water is super important. And it kind of goes back to the conversation I've had with Rachel about how much time I've spent on water and mineral water. And water is a huge portion of your drink, right? Because it's 20-25% dilution in this cocktail, but it's also water's very prevalent in the whiskey you're using, right? Because it's mostly water. Even if it's 100 proof, it's 50% whiskey. It's 100. It's the other 50% is coming from water. And if you talk to anybody who makes whiskey or anybody who makes spirits, they talk about their water source, whether that be Kentucky and the limestone water out there, or every single whiskey in Scotland has this really elaborate story about where they get their water from. They all come from these little brooks, like these little bubbling brooks, called the Bonnie Doon, like it's always specific. It's very specific. It picks up all this mineral water,
For sure.
But
it's in all of their marketing material.
Every whiskey distillery I've been to around the world has talked about their water extensively because it's so important to the overall flavor of what their product is at the end result. So think about water that you're putting in your cocktail. So if you're using your own ice, you should probably use filtered water, water with a like a 7 pH with as little like mineral content or like imperfections, right? So the whiter your ice cube's going to look, there's more minerals in there, there's more CO2, there's more junk in that water. So think about that. If your ice cubes that you're freezing are actually pretty clear, then you have really good water, maybe reverse osmosis or something like that. And if you don't have access to good water at your house, you could probably find some at like your grocery store, so.
We went through a period where we just bought water just for making ice cubes because, I mean, we're in San Diego. We've got some of the hardest water in the world.
It sucks.
Well, maybe not in the world, but at least in the U.S. And
well, I mean, outside of Flint, like we're doing better than a couple places.
Flint, Mexico.
But we lived in a rental and we didn't have a water filtration system and we just never got around to changing the Brita filters well enough, and so we just we're just gonna buy water to make ice.
Also, we
made it into this little ritual that we really enjoyed.
We did many experiments though with the San Diego water. Like we did multiple passes through the water filter. We tried all kinds of things to try and get the tap water to work, and I could always taste it. So it was just like, never again. Either I'm going to buy my ice or I'm going to buy the water. So.
That's what we do.
That's something I would recommend, is just being, taking a look at your water source that you're freezing, because it ends up in your glass. And it is a total noticeable change. Like, I always like, the most elaborate approach to, when I'm thinking like, how can I make this cocktail better? It's like, it's got to be the whiskey, right? I need to spend $80 more on whiskey to make this cocktail correctly. When really what it is it's water. I'm using bad water. So think about those easy things can fix. Yeah. Instead of like, I mean, obviously everybody would like to sip. I wish we were all sipping on a 12-year Rip Van Winkle, old fashioned right now. Of course, we all want that, but you can actually make just as great a cocktail using very inexpensive whiskeys, as long as you get the other little variants right.
This is the Old Forester.
Yeah. It's excellent.
So we had James shared his recipe, which was Uncle Nearest 1884 with Fee Brothers orange bitters.
So good.
Really pale color and sweeter taste, really nice. if you all have a favorite version of your old-fashioned, including whiskey and bitter combo, or if you go off the whiskey train and you like to make a nice rum old-fashioned every once in a while, or a mezcal old-fashioned.
When you think about making, like,
drop it in the chat, because I'm sure everyone else would love to.
Did you get them? We got this one fly.
The fruit fly.
Yeah, the one
drop it in the chat, and then
drop it like a chat.
The other thing I just wanted to mention is that we're probably going to do these live streams for about 45 minutes, which is about where we're at right now, but we don't want to close down the Q&A.
Wow,
I know.
Quick.
It goes so fast. We don't want to close down the Q&A until you all have had a chance to ask any other questions that you want. So this is the last call. Drop them in the chat, and we'll get to them. This has been really fun.
I got one other thing to talk about when you're talking about spirits variations, like swapping out spirits. It's something that we call, like, Mr. Potato Head, right? Like, you swap out one ingredient for the other. And when you do that, I would recommend thinking about where that spirit comes from when you're thinking about what sugar to use, like what sweetener to use. So if you're using a rum, I would recommend using like a cane sugar or something like that, and you can get that at the store in granule form. If you're using
Plantation 5-year
totally
from Diane.
And if you're using a tequila or a mezcal or an agave spirit, I would recommend using an agave syrup, because those two obviously go together. So think about that. It's something I always would train my bartenders about when they're creating, their own cocktails. Is think about using like flavors or like ingredients. If you're making like some sort of a variation on a whiskey sour, you would want to use a lemon instead of lime, because limes don't really grow in regions where whiskey is created. Whereas if you're, making a tequila cocktail, you'd probably use lime juice as opposed to lemon. So that's something I would keep in mind as well. So I love rum old fashions, and I love being able to use, molasses and cane sugar in those cocktails, because they really enhance a lot of those nuanced flavors in the rums. So cool.
Thank you. Well, we haven't had any more questions, so I'm going to wait one more minute. And then the last thing I just want to mention is, as you know, we're starting this new adventure called the Cocktail Journey. We're officially launching next week, and we're going to be doing this every single week. So for right now, it's going to be a lot of fun. We've got a couple of experts lined up. That Stefan's going to be here next week.
Yep. I'm excited about the martini.
Yeah, with a martini. And then we're going to do the Sazerac after that. And I'll be sending out sort of a little schedule tomorrow morning via email. So if you're not on our mailing list, please join. You can go to launch.thecocktailjourney.com. And that you can scroll up and find that link in the chat as well. You can either just sign up for the mailing list at the bottom of the page if you want to make sure that you're getting those emails. And then you could also consider joining and becoming a member of the Cocktail Journey. We've got 2 membership levels right now, and one is it's basically right now at our early bird rate, $5 a month, so less than the cost of a cocktail.
It's like a third of the cost of a cocktail at a bar.
Seriously. Yeah. So you're not spending money on cocktails right now, but we'd love to continue to bring some great special guests to you and chat about this stuff. So for less than $5 a month,
sorry, go ahead, finish your.
We've got that, and then we're going to be starting to do a lot of great on-demand and in-depth content, masterclass style, beginning probably in March. But you can sign up now as well at an early bird rate. We're doing annual signups right now just so we can get things going. If you're not ready, that's totally fine. Sign up on the list. Check us out a little bit more as we dive into this, and come join us when you are ready. Yeah, we also have a few lifetime memberships left, which have been very popular. So if
you get like a fun jacket, like a members only jacket.
There's going to be some cool stuff that will only be available to our founding lifetime members that I can't talk too much about.
We were going to do undergarments, but we decided that was weird.
It is a little weird. And also, like, it's weird if people like try to show that off. Like, oh, I'm a lifetime member. You like
Not
my
for
Speedos?
me, but I mean for everyone else.
Yeah.
We are also going to be doing a giveaway for the first 100 members, and we're about at that place. So that's going to be announced very, very shortly, and that'll include like a shopping spree at standardspoon.com. Stock yourself up on barware and some other stuff. So just stay tuned. Make sure you're on the list, and we'll be in touch again. Sean?
Well, there's one more question.
Yeah, about bitters.
Patrick asked about bitters and how it affects the taste of old fashions.
Totally changes the flavor, right? So all bitters will have bitter agents in them, right? So they'll help balance the drink. The difference between a true cocktail like an old-fashioned or whiskey cocktail and like a julep is the fact that it has bitters, which will help dry out the drink. It adds a really complex bitterness to it. That way it's not just sweet and boozy. It's sweet, boozy, complex, bitter, awesome, right? And so each bitters will provide a different flavor component. They all give you that bitter ingredient to balance the drink. So if you like more citrusy old fashions, I highly recommend grapefruit, orange, citrus bitters. If you love spice, if you're somebody who always grabs the Sriracha bottle or Tabasco, I highly recommend some spicy bitters, Hellfire and all these, firewater bitters. They work great in old fashions. They work even better in tequila cocktails, obviously. If you like more aromatic, more cinnamon, like nutmeg, dark, like island spices, that's where aromatic Angostura kind of comes in. If you like chocolate, there's all kinds of great chocolate bitters now. Angostura just came out with an amazing cacao bitters. They just launched.
I want it.
It's the first product they launched in 100 years, so of course it's freaking delicious. But they've had 100 years to think of it. But you could do mole. There's a very classic mole bitters that's out on the market that kind of adds that, kind of Oaxacan spice thing going on. So yeah, it changes everything. And that was why I spent like a couple of years just making bitters, like in my free time, just to kind of discover that before like you could get them. Now you can go to a bottle shop or something, and there's a whole wall of bitters that I don't need to make bitters anymore. Everything that could ever be created is already out there. Yeah, and that's great. It's one less thing I have to do in my house.
A fun thing that we've done in the past when we were doing lots of hosting and cocktail parties is to have like an old-fashioned bar. You got to be careful with the make your own old-fashioned. But we also it's fun to have a little menu and say like, the old-fashioned is what we're drinking tonight, but we have these 6 different bitters and different sweeteners, and so people can begin to explore their tastes and their preferences.
When dinner parties come back, I highly recommend buying like some of those gag dice, like the big ones, and just put like whatever bitters you have in your house, like put different bitters on every side of one dice, and on the other one, put every kind of syrup you've made on the other. And you can infuse your syrups, right? So you can have like a vanilla syrup and a grapefruit syrup or whatever, like grapefruit peels. You can just throw the two and be like, well, it's old-fashioned roulette tonight, That's fun. I've done that for guest shifts for daiquiris before, and it was such a crowd pleaser. It was 3 different dice, big old colorful
big, fluffy ones.
One was all kinds of different rums, one was all kinds of different syrups, and one was all sorts of bitters. And just throw them in the air, and whatever you get, you get. And there was some really weird ones, right? There was crab, infused bitters or something. It was really strange. There was a couple weird ones. I don't expect you'll do a weird off at your dinner parties, but it's a fun thing to do, right? If you have,
I don't know. I think some people in our audience that might be exactly what they're looking for.
There you go. There it is. I just gave you a great idea. Use it. Don't cite me on it. Just have a good time with it. Enjoy it with your friends.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Come back again next week. Also, would love to hear your feedback. If you're the kind of person that gives good feedback, let us know. Send me an email, racheleva@standardspoon.com. We're going to be exploring things like, is this the best time to host a live stream? What platforms do you prefer? Do you not like the fact that you guys are chatting on 2 different platforms and can't see each other?
Yeah.
So, these are the kinds of things that we'll work on and we'll get better at. But we again, I think, have a background in designing products in collaboration with our community. And that is also true about this whole project and this journey. It's really informed by the things that you all are interested in, want to learn, and want to engage around. So please let us know. We will actually take it into and under advisement and implement it. So cheers, everyone.
We're all definitely thick-skinned, too, so we're not going to be like, oh, we didn't like it.
Yes.
Sean's like, thank you all. Thanks for listening to
me
ramble.
Thank you. Good to see you. Very good to see some very familiar names and faces. John, I think we've got to connect about a few things. And thanks, Diane. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, James. Really
Stephen,
appreciate all your comments.
Not the fly.
Bergen.
Thank you, Bergen.
Bergen? We decided it was Bergen, yeah.
Yep. His
Cheers.
last comment was, I like the point about ingredients. A few dollars spent on water and ice
Totally.
is probably a greater influence than just
It's
a few dollars more.
It's not the sexy,
on whiskey.
like part of the discussion, but it's the one that can actually make a huge difference, and you don't even have to spend the money.
Yep.
So I just saved you guys so much money.
Oh, one last thing, because Patrick just reminded everyone, he's in the YouTube channel, that he has all his standard spoon gear. I will be sending out an email tomorrow to everyone who missed the live stream with the recording of the live stream. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is if you want to sign up for a membership, we're also doing a special for Valentine's Day on a stirred cocktail kit. So if you don't quite have your stirred equipment yet, click on the link tomorrow in the email. We're going to do like 20% off or 40% off the kit if you buy a membership or sign up for the cocktail journey. So keep your eyes on that because we also want to make sure that you are well equipped and stocked to make cocktails with us for the rest of this year.
Cheers.
All right, cheers. It's going to take me a minute to shut this down.
Can you still
probably.
say peace?
You can say
Yeah,
peace.
you can say peace. Why not?
Come on, I've thrown it up. There it is.
Bye.